The FATF Travel Rule is global in theory, but in practice it's a patchwork. Thresholds, timelines, and enforcement all differ by country. In this topic, you'll see how those mismatches impact cross-border VASPs, and why, in reality, highest standard wins often becomes the operating rule. When you hear FATF Travel Rule, think global compass, not detailed map. FATF sets the principle. VASPs should share key originator and beneficiary data for qualifying transfers. Each country then turns that principle into its own rules, timelines, thresholds, and enforcement style. For NovaX and FinBridge, that means one high-level standard, but dozens of local variations. The real challenge isn't learning FATF once. It's operationalizing that principle in every jurisdiction you touch. Thresholds are one of the biggest travel rule headaches. Some jurisdictions expect full data from the very first dollar. Others allow a middle zone, where you share limited information below a set value and full details above it. A few set a high threshold, but back it with aggressive supervision and painful penalties. For NovaX or FinBridge, you can't design controls around a single number. You need corridor-specific rules that default to the strictest requirement. Timing is just as fragmented. When it comes to the travel rule or MICA-style obligations, countries rarely move in sync. NovaX might already face full enforcement in one market, enjoy a grace period in another, and see only draft rules in a third. That mismatch forces a core strategy decision. Do you only comply where you absolutely must, creating a messy patchwork? Or do you design one global standard that meets the strictest regime and roll it out everywhere? Layered on top of that is a built-in tension. Privacy rules say collect and share as little personal data as possible, while AML rules say collect and share enough data to spot and stop crime. On a single cross-border transfer, NovaX might be legally required to both share customer data and not share it. Managing that paradox across multiple jurisdictions at once is a central compliance challenge. Hard-coding travel rule logic country by country creates three kinds of pain. First, the customer experience becomes unpredictable. Some users hit sudden extra steps, others don't, and nobody understands why. Second, product and engineering are stuck in endless switch flipping as laws change, slowing every release. Third, you almost guarantee compliance gaps where payment routes cross jurisdictions. The lesson: design one global standard and localize at the edges instead of embedding ad hoc rules in code. NovaX responds with a highest common denominator strategy. Instead of customizing travel rule controls country by country, they assume the toughest rule anywhere will eventually hit everywhere. They set a $0 threshold globally, bake in the strongest privacy safeguards they can find, and lock this into one global policy. That means more friction up front, but far simpler operations, fewer edge case debates, and a much lower chance of being caught out by a new rule. FinBridge takes a different path from bare minimum compliance. They assume the travel rule will arrive everywhere and act now. They collect originator and beneficiary data above their own internal thresholds, even where no law exists yet. They calibrate friction, tougher checks on higher risk corridors, smoother flows where risk is low. And they integrate early with travel rule networks and counterparties, so when regulation lands, they're already operating as if it were in force. Putting those approaches side by side makes the trade-offs clear. NovaX uses a highest common denominator model. They take the strictest rules they face anywhere, set a near-zero threshold, and apply that globally. It's conservative and can be painful for product teams, but it massively simplifies global governance and regulator messaging. FinBridge instead runs a proactive, risk-based model. They define internal thresholds and scenarios, anticipating where standards are heading. It's more nuanced, but it makes future compliance transitions smoother and more controlled. Now, zoom in on how this actually runs in the background. Think of every crypto transfer as fuel passing through a smart compliance engine. First, you collect basic transaction attributes: amount, asset, who, and where the parties are. Those attributes trigger the relevant jurisdiction rules, thresholds, what data is needed, and how it must be sent. The engine then decides: let the transfer proceed, trigger travel rule data collection, or raise an exception to review or block. The key is avoiding country-by-country hard coding and centralizing this logic in one configurable engine. None of this works in a silo. Cross-functional governance is where travel rule compliance really lives. Legal and privacy track new rules and reconcile them with data protection. Product and engineering embed those rules into systems without breaking usability. Compliance operations then runs the playbook every day, handling edge cases, difficult counterparties, and the investigations machines can't yet solve. Regulatory divergence isn't going away, so treat it as a core design constraint. First, keep a living map of travel rule and data protection rules wherever you operate. Then, pick your stance. Strictest rule like NovaX or more risk-based like FinBridge. Finally, invest in configurable, centralized rules and messaging, not one-off local hacks. That's how you turn a global patchwork into a manageable, scalable compliance framework.